From the great northern wilderness, I bid you all good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. My name is Leah Prime, and this is the Invisible Night School. For those of you just joining us, the Invisible Night School is a small consortium of lay researchers and scholars pursuing the study and exploration of ufology, high strangeness, and the phenomenon. INS is not a monolith. We represent varied ideas, backgrounds, disciplines, and experiences, and seek to engage in good faith dialogue with other curious minds. Tonight, we're joined by Sarah Scoles. Sarah Scoles is a freelance journalist and contributing writer at Wired and Popular Science. She's also the author of Making Contact, Jill Tarter and the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which came out in 2017. And They Are Already Here, UFO Culture and Why We See Saucers, which came out in 2020. She also has a forthcoming book coming out, I believe, later this year, maybe early next year, called Mass Defect, Life in the Nuclear Age. We're super excited to have Sarah join us. So without any further delay, I'm going to welcome her, Nick, and Campbell onto the stream.
Hello. That was a quick one. How's everybody doing?
Very well, Nick. How are you doing tonight?
Excellent.
Great. It's great to have you, Sarah. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So where should we begin?
I really wanted to know a little bit more about They're Already Here. Can you tell us a little bit about that book and kind of how you came to write it?
Sure. Yeah, it all started for me back in the famous or infamous December 2017, I believe it was, with the big New York Times story about the Pentagon's UFO program. And I read that like seemingly everyone else on this planet, I guess. And just, you know, I've been interested in astronomy and space and everything for a long time, and I had never really delved into the UFO world, but that caught my attention. And I had an editor at Wired magazine who was like, hey, why don't you look into that weird thing the New York Times published? And so I just kind of started going through the article point by point and trying to figure out everything I could about every sentence in there. And then my editor was like, wow, that's going to be a long article. And so when it's going to be a long article, you have to write a book. And so I embarked on writing They're Already Here, which I hope at least is a kind of, I'm not an anthropologist, but an anthropological look at different aspects of the UFO community and how it's evolved over time, like whether through politics or money or spiritual belief or conspiracy, and just kind of meeting people in different realms like that and kind of hoping to relay their experiences through 250 or so pages.
Did you, in your experience, kind of as a pseudo-anthropologist, did you see a lot of overlap between the UFO kind of community and the conspiracy theory community?
I did some, although I want to be careful to say that, I mean, there does seem to be some kind of Venn diagram between some elements of conspiracy theory world and some elements of UFO world. But I think what actually started me to be really interested in the book were people who did not necessarily think about it that way, but were just like, here's this really interesting mystery that's been with humans for, you know, a debatable amount of time. And I think this naughty problem is very interesting and I want to pursue it. And so those people doing it that way were more of who I talk to than people on the conspiracy side. I don't know. Do you guys see a lot of conspiracy things going on?
I mean, it depends. There's so many different kind of like subsections of the community as a whole. Like UFO Twitter is only like one of those subdivisions and stuff, you know. So yeah, I mean, you see some overlap, but not everybody. Like all of us, we all come from different kind of perspectives, but I wouldn't say any of it is conspiracy theory. Maybe Leah.
Thank you, Nick. Well, with that segue, yeah, so I'm very, very interested. I think, you know, I will say that occasionally when people get upset at me on Twitter, they'll call me a conspiracy theorist, which is really interesting. And I don't mean that ironically, because I regularly engage with and talk about conspiracy theories and write on them, like I'm writing this book on Art Bell. But I'm more interested in conspiracies is like modern folklore and like community, like sense making and myth making. It also very much came of age when they were fun conspiracy theories. They weren't like the Jews did 9/11 and the vaccine's going to kill us all. Those are like the less savory conspiracies.
We still have the flat Earth people around.
Yeah, flat Earth seems so endearing to me now. It seems so it seems quaint in a way. But I think what does happen with the UFO community, which is similar to what's happened with the kind of like woo-woo spirituality community, which I am definitely a member of that, is that conspiracy theories, because ufology and the spirituality communities are so kind of ontologically generous, it also creates this space for conspiracy theories to kind of worm their way in, I think. And also we have a very tardy Lewis, so I'm going to get him added to the stream as well. I know, no good man. Lewis.
There he is.
Hi.
Good evening.
Hello.
Welcome to the Invisible Night School. We're glad you could join us.
Late from day school.
Yeah. I mean, I actually love conspiracy theories, not the gross ones, but like the idea of something that you could just like try to unravel and figure out. I mean, I think some conspiracy theories can be dangerous and some of them are very illogical, but I, as a journalist, actually, I try to have conspiracy theory Fridays is what I call them, where I just pick like a weird idea I have that's probably not true and try to see if I can find any evidence for or against it and just like allow a little rabbit hole because it's fun in its way.
Is there anything in your past that you would attribute that open-mindedness to, like retaining that interest in looking at those things that maybe aren't true? Because I get a sense that a lot of people lose that at some point in their lives.
Yeah. I don't know. I kind of trace a lot of my philosophy about the world back to my upbringing. So I guess we'll get deep really fast, which is I was raised very devoutly Mormon. And so, and then I left the church when I was 18, basically as soon as I could find out things about the world for myself. And I think just that experience of having like this entire worldview like set out for you of like, here's everything that's true. It's definitely true. We're the only ones who know the truth. And then finding out that I didn't think that any of it was true kind of made me think that like, it doesn't sound very humble to say you're humble, but I think it made me feel like I don't know anything. And I want to try to find things out and prove myself wrong and all of that kind of thing. So. That's probably what my therapist would say it came from.
And now you had your book, actually, the first one, Making Contact. If I remember correctly, came out in 2017. And if so that means it's about making contact, but not about UFOs themselves. So did you have a completely distinct perspective on something like SETI from like people are seeing things in Earth's atmosphere? Was that sort of like your view historically?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that is like I came from the world of astronomy. Like before I decided not to do that, I was planning to go be an astronomer. And that's how they think of it in general, as not like, you know, things on a spectrum, aliens or strange things in the universe on a spectrum, but like there's this thing called SETI. It's separate from these things that people see in the sky. And so honestly, I never thought about UFOs very much at all. And I was just very focused on the world of the SETI people, which is a little less distinct now, I think, probably, that all, you know, the past 5 or 6 years have happened than it used to be. But back then was just like two ships in the night, I guess. I don't know. Do you guys think of them on a kind of continuum, or?
Well,
I'm just going to keep asking you questions because that's my job.
Yeah.
This is very artful.
No, I don't personally think that things people are seeing in the atmosphere are, you know, non-human intelligence or something. I don't think that. Louise, what about you?
I agree with you, Campbell. But
oh wow,
I mean, I think there's definitely a psychosocial aspect to it, and that's what I find interesting. I pretty much don't credit the ET hypothesis at all. Like, I think there is probably life out there in the universe, but I just, in a way, it would be like the most boring explanation for UFO.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really human idea. The we kind of put ourselves into the unknown. So, you know, lights in the sky that we can identify are, you know, little people in vehicles, just like we are. Yeah, I'm not too big on the ETH either.
Mm-hmm.
Leah, let us know what you think.
Let it rip, right? Okay. It was the affirmative action woo, I will say. Yeah, so one of my favorite things that Nick has ever said is that ufology isn't just one thing, right? And I am extremely fascinated by experiencers because I see them through a lens of spiritual emergence, which is something that's happened to humans basically forever. But I'm especially fascinated by how people make the connection between their experiences, whatever they are, like without conferring like clause, how they connect those to UFOs. Like, how do they make the connection that something happened to them, or they had an awakening or a transcendent experience of some kind, and then it winds up connected to like lights in the sky or ships or whatever. I'm largely of the opinion that what people physically are seeing is likely prosaic. But I do think something truly numinous and mysterious happens on sort of the periphery of human experience, whether deliberately induced or spontaneous. And I haven't dismissed the idea of it being near non-human intelligence or something similar to that.
Mm-hmm. I've also been interested in the past. I can't remember now who brought it up to me, but just the different meanings that people attribute to seeing something in the sky. Like, you know, my neighbor could walk out, see something truly strange in the sky, go, huh, and like walk back inside and never think about it again. And then someone else could have like a whole awakening about the universe, and it could form like their worldview, personality for years.
Nick, it's like the Hudson Valley sightings.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, these are you familiar with the Hudson Valley wave of the 80s?
Minorly.
You're about to be.
Yeah. Give me a refresher.
They kind of coincidentally happened on weekends during the summer only. Looking back on the reporting of that, you kind of discovered that it was this group of pilots flying out of Stormville Airport, and like these sightings actually became predictable. However, a lot of the individual witness accounts from this wave are really fascinating. These people had like psychic experiences, as they described, seeing this, what turned out to be a formation of planes flying. So like that is still kind of like an interesting facet about UFOs. Even when the actual case is solved, it becomes an IFO in that situation. But yet all of these people are claiming to have these kind of extraordinary experiences. So that's more interesting to me than what the UFO is more often than not.
Sarah, could you tell us a little bit more about your experience engaging with the modern UFO subject as distinct from the search for extraterrestrial intelligence through astronomy? And in your book, like what motivated you to go on the journey that you describe? And could you talk a little bit about how you saw things that you couldn't explain and the psychological process that you went through in interpreting those observations?
Sure. Let's see where to start. I think what compelled me about it was really, you know, everybody's a little bit self-centered. So what compelled me was that I recognized a lot of myself in the people who I first interviewed about UFOs, just like people who like something to investigate, like to think about big ideas and big problems like a mystery, and you know, get sucked into topics. And I identify with all of that. I think those are also good qualities in a journalist. And so, you know, that helped me, I think, connect to people on this topic that honestly I really hadn't thought about very much at all. I've kind of I don't know. I like planes. I like space. It would have made sense that I had been compelled by UFOs before this, but it took this. And let's see. What was the other half of the question? Oh, my own experiences seeing things I couldn't explain. Yeah, I think the first time I really saw something that was truly strange was a pretty cool experience, even though it wasn't a UFO. I was out in Montana Wyoming, for the solar eclipse, you know, a few years ago. And I was camping with some friends in this pretty remote area. And we were all just, it was a fire ban. So we were all just sitting around in the dark, making small talk and deep talk and staring at the sky. And then all of a sudden this light came, and it was like a spotlight kind of swinging down and then like beaming itself directly at us and then going away. And for just like, you know, that whole thing lasted maybe a second, but for like the second where it was pointed at me, I was like, oh my God, they found me. They've been here. I didn't think they were real. And there's a crazy thing, and it's going to tractor beam me up into its UFO. And, you know, I am also not on the ETH train, really, in general, though I'm open to the idea. And so it was very strange to me that I kind of had that reaction to something that turned out to be the International Space Station, swinging by overhead and having a flare. But it was just another one of those moments where you're like, oh, you think you're so smart and you know everything about the universe. Here's a weird spotlight from space that's going to shine at you. And then I think the other time in reporting the book that I encountered stuff was I went out and camped outside of Area 51 for a few days. Highly recommend. Very fun. I don't know if you guys have ever done it, but you should take a road trip.
I'd love to.
It was great. I don't know. I think it's not always as exciting as it was when I was there, but you know, again, just camping in the dark, staring up at the sky. And I first saw what turned out to be flare exercises where jets just drop flares kind of in a formation, and the formation looks like a flying saucer. And although I knew like this is clearly military testing, I was like, wow, I absolutely understand why people think there are UFOs out here. And then just
this is Stephen Greer's whole business model you're talking about.
I know. This is my advertising pitch to capitalize on it for my own
Nice.
my own tourist weekend. But yeah, I think it was just like I am compelled by the idea of seeing things that I can't explain, even if I later explain them, and like being surprised and noticing things. And so it made me feel also special that I got to see it, which I think is how a lot of people feel when they experience something. Yeah, I'll stop there.
You said you were kind of surprised by the reaction of the sighting that turned out to be the space station. Did you have much of a history growing up being interested in UFOs? Like, where did that idea come from, that when you saw that spotlight flip around, that it was like extraterrestrial?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I was always interested in aliens. Like I was a little kid who would draw like, here's a fake planet and the aliens I made up to live on it and that kind of thing. But I somehow left UFOs out of the equation entirely. And so I think it's just living in our culture with movies and books and things like that, that if that happened in a movie, like either the military is abducting you because you're like a secret spy and they definitely need you to save the country, or the aliens are coming to get you.
Mm-hmm. So you would say that concept struck you, but it originated probably from media.
I think so. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't actively like hold the belief that things in the sky were coming or were from any place, you know, spectacular.
Mm-hmm.
Did you visit the Integratron in your journeys? I forgot.
No, I'm not familiar with it. What is it?
Oh, that was George Van Tassel's sort of stillborn project in the California desert. Like he was going to build oh, you know about this, Leah, right? About
Oh, dude, I don't. Not only do I know about it, I'm planning on going to it when I go to Contact in the Desert.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's near Giant Rock, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like an hour. It's like an hour and a half from Palm Springs.
Mm-hmm. But I was going to ask Sarah about. I just brought up the Integratron because of the contactees. Do you think there's like a resuscitation of the contactee scene these days? Like, what are the parallels between like the 60s and 70s and now?
That's a good question. I didn't do totally deep research on contactees myself, in part because I felt their experiences were so like emotionally affecting and profound that I wasn't like equipped to write about that. Like I didn't have the background to do it well. But I would say that I think that, and since I'm sort of making this up, you guys can just tell me if I'm wrong. But that the way that the modern world works now is people can find each other, and when people can find each other and talk about something, it makes them more willing to reveal more about it. And you know, I feel like in the 60s and 70s, people were also open to that, and we're having a lot of communal groups and things like that. And maybe that's happening online. That's my hypothesis I just made up. What do you think?
It's a great hypothesis, because I think there's also this mimetic component to these disclosures where one person will hear someone tell their story and then it will trigger something in them that says it is safe for me to tell my story, and now we have like a shared reference point so I can make my disclosures or talk about my own experience. And of course, I mean, no more need be said about just the echo chamber dynamic that we find online, right? Where we all are homophily is a main driver in Twitter or on these social media sites or connecting online. So we tend to surround ourselves with people just like ourselves, which particularly when you start getting to some of these more fringe ideas is not necessarily always the best thing in the world.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask a different question, but since you already touched on media and books and movies and things like that, you know, part of the reason I was super excited to have you on is when I saw your interview with Jack, I was like, oh my God, this is totally someone I want to be friends with, because I feel like there's just so much in your background that's really fascinating and insightful. And I was wondering if you could tell us about what thinkers or books or ideas have really shaped your worldview.
That's a very good question. I mean, I think going back to the earliest thing that really shaped my worldview about the universe and kind of big scientific questions about the universe was Carl Sagan's Contact, which is not everyone's favorite Carl Sagan book, and not everyone loves Carl Sagan, but I got it when I think I read it when I was like 12 or 13, which was a very big book for a 12-year-old, but just introducing me to the idea kind of outside of the religion that I was part of, that like people were investigating things beyond Earth and beyond humans, and that was something people did for a job, and it was something people wrote books about, and so that was kind of world expanding for me. Let's see, what else? I read a lot of fiction, which I feel like is not the best analogy here. Can I ask you guys to share one while I think of my next best one?
Oh,
who are your favorite
I will happily
thinkers?
share. Well, I don't know if I'll share exactly my favorite thinker, but I read this book called When We Cease to Understand the World by Benjamin Labutat. Anyone who follows me on Twitter sees me carry on about this book all the time. And it's basically like magical realist literary fiction that tells a combined story of all the really advanced physicists and mathematicians of the 20th century, and how their ideas interplay with non-duality and Advaita Vedanta. So it's like it's these narratives of like Schrödinger and Schwarzschild, interspersed with like excerpts from the Bhagavad Gita. It's very much, I've called it like an experiencer novel without actually being an experiencer novel, because it's one of those books, when I read it, felt like it was really touching on like the transcendent or mystical. And also, yes, I see Michael Redmond, Fringe Quest, friend of the pod, also says fabulous book. Yes, great minds think alike. But I recommend this book constantly because it came into my life as I was getting much more involved in my own spirituality and sort of engagement with mysticism, and has gone on to be something I just kind of categorically recommend to anyone who has a strong sense of curiosity, especially about math and science.
Okay, I'm gonna have to go look that one up and read it. I thought of two more that I kind of read at formative years, probably when I was a little older, that I think are similar. I read Borges Fictiones. I don't know if you guys have read that one. Yeah, which is kind
Borges
of all.
Is awesome.
Yeah, I thought it was like, my family always used to watch Twilight Zone episodes on New Year's Eve during the marathon. And I thought, like, this is the highbrow literary version of the Twilight Zone episodes, of just like imagining weird things in the world that have metaphorical meanings that your 16-year-old mind can like maybe grasp or maybe not. And just kind of, playing around with the world and imagining it different ways. And similarly, the book Einstein's Dreams had a pretty big impact on me. If you guys have read that one, it's by Alan
That's a great
Lightman.
one. Yep.
Yeah, and just every chapter he imagines that space-time works differently. Like, what if we lived in a world where things were different? And I think I really just admired in both of those books the way to take the world as we know it and imagine it as something slightly different, weirder, and maybe more interesting. So.
Well, that's an interesting aspect of the UFO community, is how deeply psychedelics and things like that seem to play into it. And there's a recognition between discrete groups that they're accessing a similar psychological state, I guess I'll call it. In your journey into UFO culture in writing your book, They Are Already Here, did you encounter any of those elements of the blending into the UFO culture with the psychedelics? And do you have any experiences yourself with psychedelic culture that helped you engage with that component?
Are you asking me to reveal my drug experiences on camera?
Right.
Yeah,
well,
Campbell's the resident Fed.
I grow cannabis on my, I have a license from the government, so I'm just
everything's legal in Colorado now, so it's fine. Yeah. That's where I am, is Colorado. Actually, I didn't, in talking to people about UFOs, really, in reporting on the book, but the first time I myself did psychedelic mushrooms, which was, don't tell my college president, but when I snuck them into the observatory where I helped run the planetarium and gave me and my friends a planetarium show.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty good. But I think, I didn't have any kind of mystical experiences myself, but I think it was a very revealing experience to see a very familiar world in kind of a boring place in a totally new way is a totally exciting thing. Just kind of rejuvenated my view of like everyday experiences. And I did write an article a while ago for Popular Science that was about people who have spiritual or mystical experiences while on psychedelics, and like what might cause that, and what that aspect of it has to do with some of the medicinal properties of psychedelics that people are investigating, like whether the spiritual experiences are tied to like clinical outcomes for people with PTSD or fear of death or addiction or things like that. And there was some amazing statistic that I think I'm about to say correctly, but it's been a while since I wrote the article, of the people who had mystical experiences and that were somehow tied to spirituality and were atheists when they started. 75% of them were not when they were done.
Yeah, DMT study,
experience.
yes.
This
Oh, is it
terrifies
the DMT
Campbell.
study?
Yeah.
Campbell has even
Yeah.
said he will not try DMT because he's afraid of how it will affect his atheism.
Yes, I feel the same way.
It feels like there's something snaps or something.
You might
It's
turn
like
out like me. Before you know it, you're gonna be surrounded by like yoga books and crystals and shit. It's
I understand.
slippery slope, man.
I'm terrified of that. Jeez. And yeah, like something like that where you can do one incident and it can change your entire worldview. That's pretty wild. And I feel like we've seen that in experiencers, eh? Like a singular experience then shapes the entire trajectory of their lives. It's a recurrent thing that we're seeing.
I'll take the Pepsi challenge. I don't think it would deconvert me from my atheism.
So Lewis, are you coming to Contact in the Desert in July? Because we should totally all go on a field trip to the Integratron.
I'll try my best.
Is that your way of saying you're going to try DMT?
Yes.
Okay.
We keep threatening Patreon. No, not right now. No, we keep threatening Patreon content called the Invisible High School, where we can all have inebriated conversations about UFOs. Yeah, I mean, like one of the things, and I think this is me again citing some of Nick's brilliance. Like Nick's commented on the trend of ufology kind of very closely following or closely outpacing existent technology. So like in the 40s and 50s, it's like UFOs from Venus or from Mars. And like as you get later, like 80s and 90s, it's like Zeta Reticuli or Alpha Centauri or whatever. And now like as our grasp on space in the popular imagination seems to be improving, although I'll sidebar and say that I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think we're just finding out how very little we actually know. But sort of as these frontiers, these physical frontiers become more familiar in the public imagination, we then move on to the next very unfamiliar frontier, which is sort of the mystical or strange behaviors of the mind and consciousness. And I think that that tends to be why things like psychedelics or spiritual emergence or transcendent or mystical experiences are now starting to increasingly weave into the kind of UFO or ufology community. So, so I know you put your book out on UFOs in 2020. It's obviously just the start of 2023. I'm really curious about how, if at all, your views have changed on this subject over the last few years.
That is a good question. I thought when I was done with the book that I would stop following it all because I was I thought, well, I was sick of writing my book for sure. I wasn't sick of UFOs, but you know, as you guys know, you can't get away from it, and so here I am. And I think that I would say first that I wish my views had changed more. Maybe, you know, there's been a lot of momentum and promises about information that will come to light and what it will be. And not that I ever necessarily believed any of those promises of enlightenment and disclosure. You know, I thought that maybe we would have at least a little more to grab onto than we did. And I feel like it's all kind of essentially in the same place as it was when I started. And so I think my view remains pretty much the same, which is mostly, I don't know, and you know, the human element, like you guys were saying earlier, is the most important and the most interesting, including things like what Leah was just talking about. And so I think that I'm excited to see how the world's view of UFOs changes as the world itself changes. And I think you're right that, you know, it is always trying to stay, you know, one step ahead of current technology. And I think that's because we are not good at imagining things that are just beyond our horizons. And so I just have to wait a few years to find out what's beyond our horizons.
Fully agree.
Have you guys had big view changes since you started looking into the topic?
I'm up and down all over the place all the time, but Not lately. I feel like I've been becoming more cynical lately. But that's just me.
Yeah, I would say that the subject has certainly shaped my worldview in some respects, because it was being like a, whatever, hardcore atheist, materialist, all that stuff, no interest in any paranormal subject up until looking into UFOs. It was the single subject that caused me to be ostracized from the mainstream skeptic community. The only thing that I was conflicting with. And so, and my perspective is that I think it's ball lightning. It's not that it's aliens. So I was shocked by that, confused. That's what sucked me in, was my own identity thing. And it's like, I need to understand why I am an island on this when every single other thing in my life aligns perfectly with this community of skeptics.
Have you figured it out?
Well, yeah, I mean, I figured out my interest. It's motivated, I think, by an adaptive reflex driven by a fear of ostracization in community groups adapting over thousands or millions of years. Some primates like us, the biggest threat to death would be to be ostracized from the group. So I think that's what has triggered my interest in trying to figure out whether I'm insane or if the skeptic community needs to catch up with what I'm saying. The odds are I'm insane, but I'm willing to wait and see what happens.
I like that.
Louise, what about you? Tell me.
Seems fair.
Maybe warming to the idea of a Jungian aspect to UFOs. I never really thought much about Jung, but when I read David Halperin's book, that really inspired me. Although I don't necessarily credit his explanation, but I think it's a valuable thing to look into.
And Leah, let's hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I was a super strict hardcore materialist until my early 20s. I worked at the Secular Student Association, which is part of like the Center for Inquiry, which is one of the big like atheist agnostic groups. Always was very intellectually preoccupied with religion. I grew up extremely observant Jewish, but that's more about rules following than like dogmatic theology or kind of conferring what to think on somebody. I grew up in a very, very intellectually permissive household. And in my late 20s, my early 30s, had what I would characterize as a very classic standard spiritual emergence without any psychedelics, without any sort of external influence, brought on by sort of the trifecta of trauma and grief and abstinence and lots of breath work and meditation. And it was a good thing I kind of had some background on what was going on, because I didn't have any history of like bipolar or psychosis or anything. I've always been pretty even keeled. But this really demarcated the difference between propositional knowledge, which I had on this idea, like I'd read on it and learned about it, and participatory knowledge, or like a Gnostic understanding of these ideas of non-duality and interconnectedness. And it pretty fundamentally shifted my worldview, but not in a traumatic or disruptive way. It was more kind of like going like, oh, okay, I guess this is just how things are. It doesn't really change too much. I still have to pay my bills, but now I just have a lot more space in my life for doing weird shit like breathwork retreats and meditation retreats and stuff.
You should try stopping to pay your bills, and then things will get really wild.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
The greatest psychedelic experience, completely disengaging from capitalism.
Yeah, definitely.
So there are all these kinds of like experiences that when they fall outside of our worldview, we come up with something new, or like we categorize it into something we know, or it sort of there's a tendency to dismiss an observation if it doesn't conform to a worldview. Sarah, could you talk a little bit about what benefit there is as science communicators, like you specifically as a journalist focusing on science stuff? What value is there in labeling these things for people? And could you talk a little bit about how, like, if there's an absence of information and people are sort of left to sort of come up with things. Is there a danger there, or is that the heart of mystery?
For the labeling question, do you mean labeling UFOs or just labeling anomalies of various sorts?
Well, either way, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you do give a label to anything, to like when you label something UFO, you're putting it into, even though it's a category unidentified, we don't understand, whatever, it's still a category. And so people talk about UFOs as if they were like, what are UFOs? As if there's like one thing that they are. And so I think it becomes kind of psychologically limiting when I think it's pretty clear, no matter what the most out there explanation is for them, that there's also probably 5,000 other explanations for a lot of them. And so when you make a category, it's just human that your brain narrows. And I was actually researching a little while ago some atmospheric scientists who had done that just in science, not in UFOs. Like there was this anomalous weird thing going on with the Northern Lights, and everybody who was a professional atmospheric scientist was like, oh, that's just like a weird way of seeing this particular phenomenon that we can categorize. It just looks weird right there. And it took amateur aurora photographers being like, no, actually, we look at this all the time and this is different. It doesn't fit into your category. It took them a while to convince the professional scientists. So I think like all over the place, it's just human nature to try to fit things and limit your view. And now that I've talked for 45 seconds, I've forgotten the second part of the question, which was, can you refresh me on the second part of the question?
Oh my goodness, I didn't have it written down. What? Anybody else remember what I said? I'm winging it here, people.
It was good. It was good. It was good.
It's like fucking amateur hour. What is this?
It's amateur hour, as you said it.
Apparently.
It was something about...
Yeah, it was something good. I know that much, but
it was something good. Oh, something. It was science
I was talking
communicators.
Yes. I was wondering if, like, obviously we aren't professionals. As a science communicator, do you think there's value in trying to provide explanations, or to sort of say we don't know, kind of like a more debunker style thing? Is there a benefit to one or the other?
I think that debunking has never gotten people a very long way with the exact crowd that they're trying to convince. In general, giving someone either a strict explanation or saying we don't know when they think they know does not work very well. Usually it's the people who are already on your side, who think they don't know or who think they agree with your explanation, who will receive that information, I guess. And so I think, but what is the better way? I mean, I think not necessarily speaking strictly to UFOs, but to lots of kind of touchy topics, trying to understand where the people you're trying to communicate to are coming from, including information that doesn't necessarily like validate their beliefs if you don't believe them, but demonstrates that you understand where they're coming from, you respect it, and here's something else to consider is a way to do it. Maybe that's a little bit of both sidesism in writing. But I think a lot of times science communicators rush to explain things they cannot explain, or portray science and scientific inquiry with more certainty than there actually is. Like, I think actually the pandemic has shown a lot of people that science is a process and scientists are fallible and get things wrong and things change as they investigate. And I think lots of news articles or things about science are always just saying, this is what it is. This is what science says. And we also thought that in 1695, and we were super wrong about a lot of that stuff. So we're probably super wrong about a lot of stuff now, I guess.
Yeah, that's something, I mean, one of the things I keep coming back to, and just in the interest of transparency, like I only have a few months background in ufology in a strict sense. Like I come more from like a maybe like high strangeness kind of conspiracy woo-woo background. But I'm constantly struck by the sense that our understanding and measurement and interpretation of reality through the scientific method is due for something of an overhaul, either methodologically or in terms of like how we construct academic research with peer review, things like that. And I say that because I feel like there's one of my favorite things one of my friends said is that the scientific method is the worst of all possible methods except for all the others, right? Where there's this idea that like it is in some sense insufficient or simply a model that we use to frame exploration and understanding, but it is not a perfect model. And I think Thomas Kuhn kind of talks about this in his book on scientific revolutions, about how like what leads to scientific revolution is the accumulation of things that no longer fit into the extant paradigm. And I keep kind of returning to this idea that just how we do science, our methodology, similar to like how you would change or adjust like the historiography being done on a historical narrative, our scientific methodology requires some kind of refactoring or revisiting in order to start incorporating some of these more like liminal subjects that otherwise fall outside the conventional scientific paradigm.
Yeah, I think
Nick, you're not having a stroke, are you?
What? No.
Okay, cool. You're wrapped. All right, good.
You sound like Charles Fort.
I think
oh my God.
Actually,
he just exists to troll me, I swear to God.
I think actually I'm gonna quote one of the actually nuclear weapons scientists who I was interviewing for the book I have been working on, not a UFO person, who is he's a cosmologist, so studies like the beginning and the nature of the universe, and they're always like the most woo of all the astronomers, I think, because they're way out there where we don't really know anything. And he had kind of gotten into reading lots of kinds of philosophy and trying to understand like how the universe started, what was the nature of life, blah, 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 and was trying to understand it through art and music and philosophy. And he was not any good at those, but he was good at science. And eventually he was like, you know, science is not the only way of understanding the world. These other ways are also very valid, but science is the one that makes the most sense to me. And I think that that's something that a lot of scientists, not all scientists, but a lot of them don't, they just can't wrap their minds around it, that their way of doing things is like a way of doing it, but not necessarily the best, and has probably left out a lot, and clearly also has a lot to learn. Like the vast majority of the universe is made up of stuff that we call dark matter and dark energy that we don't understand. And it's just like, you know, 90 whatever % of it. And like science hasn't figured that out. And so I just think that there are other ways of knowing about the world, and maybe figuring out how to incorporate those more with science is a direction things could head. Also, peer review sucks, and that's, I agree with you, Leah, on that.
I like don't want to tell UFO people about the reproducibility crisis, because I feel like then they will never accept anything ever again that comes out of an academic article.
Wow.
Yeah, Louise, could you throw a few comments at that as a professional scientist?
Answer for your people, Louis.
Yes, please.
Well, I mean, you talked about the liminal subject. Do you think? Well, let me throw a question back at you, Leah, and also Sarah. What you think? Is it like a hankering for a different kind of substance, if you'd like spirit stuff? Because you could talk about religious experiences or the numinous in terms of emergent properties of complex systems, i.e. the nervous system, and how that fits into the society, etc. But at the end of it, is it like a hankering for like a spirit realm, something which is made of something non-physical. Like what does that even mean to say something is made of something not non-physical? Like, but is that really like the desire underlying that?
Well, Sarah.
No, I was going to say you have to go first. You're running this show.
Age before beauty. I'll talk first. But also, one sec, I want to call out a comment from an audience member who's upset that I called them UFO people. My dude, I say UFO people as if I, too, am not a UFO person. I am also definitely a UFO person.
Yeah, I'm a UFO person, too.
Like, I go to conferences and I pay a lot of Earth dollars to attend. Like, I am definitely a UFO person. Yeah, so, Lewis, I'm going to answer your question with a standard discursive response that doesn't exactly answer it, but hopefully will kind of...
Typical.
I know. I'm made for politics, man. So, like, I think a lot about Bernardo Kastrup's Meaning and Absurdity. And the reason I bring this book up repeatedly is because what he basically starts, the premise he builds on, is that strongly objective reality doesn't really exist. We have weakly objective reality, and then we also likely have some kind of idealism, right? And he uses this kind of three-prong approach of strong and weak objectivity and then idealism as the entree into talking about how it's a modern convention to make this extremely stark delineation between fiction and nonfiction, or truth and fact, and stories and myth. And that he draws upon sort of these, I guess, like, and I'm trying to be mindful of kind of like the weird, like, mysticism we can create in talking about indigenous or traditional cultures, but this idea that there is this third space that sort of exists between actual factual hard truth and pure like imagination and fiction, and that it's in this third space that our experiences with the uncanny or the strange or the numinous occur, and that we are lacking these narratives now in this ultra materialist and scientific world. Like, we don't have narratives to talk about that space in a way that gives them, like, that does justice to their complexity and to their meaning. And I think, like, someone who kind of gets into that, like, in a Western sense, is like Jung. Like, he definitely sees and understands the value of of myth, and myth as truth, even if it's not actually fact. But, you know, I do think that, you know, if I want to go really off the ranch here, I think a whole lot of this subject ties into, like, the meta crisis and the meaning crisis that people have, where we have such poor narratives for sense making and for understanding our world and for making sense of the great and terrible things that happen to us, that we have kind of no escape valve or pressure valve that we can explore those things through and construct, like, frameworks for understanding them and integrating them.
Yeah, I think what I was going to say kind of aligns with that last part of what Leo was saying, which is that no matter what realm you're coming from or how you go about it, I think all humans' primary pursuits are about searching for meaning and also searching for whatever their version of the numinous is, including, like, you know, particle physicists messing around with particle accelerators. And they are trying to both, you know, solve a mystery and find a mystery and understand something about the world and find something that is their own sort of higher power. And cosmologists like the guy I talked to is, you know, he's ultimately trying to investigate, like, what am I doing here? How did I get here? And I kind of think that all of it, science and spirituality and all of it is just looking for that connection to the universe in some way to make sense of our existence on Earth, whether that's through particle accelerators or UFOs or both. I'm sure there's some UFO people who work at CERN also.
What about, have you heard of Wilfred Seller's the manifest image? This idea that you know, there are items in our consciousness which are we take them to be real, but they might not be real in an absolute objective sense, like words, right? We think about words, but do words really exist? Okay, but they exist in some sense in how we use them, because they're so central to our cognition and our way of organizing our reality, that they do take on a kind of actual reality. It's just that not in the same sense as maybe I don't know, a molecule or this table or something. So Daniel Dennett, actually, in his book, what's it called? His latest book about his theory of consciousness, talks about the manifest image, and tries to put it like in a mimetic perspective. Like, he's a big defender of memes, which is a pretty controversial idea. But I'm just trying to locate what you and Leah just said, but that you could actually just, explore these things in a objective framework, I think. But there could be a tension there.
Yeah, and I think like people are starting to, right? Like, I harp on Daniel Ingram all the time and his Emergent Phenomenology Research Consortium. Like, they're starting to get into this with like this constellation of pretty well regarded and respected institutions. Like, we're talking like Harvard, Oxford, MIT, like, big institutions that are studying kind of the strange and uncanny. And then there's also a smaller meditation focused org called Cheetah House that similarly does this, provides like studying and guidance basically for distressed meditators, people who experience like psychiatric disruption after going on a 10-day retreat or whatever.
But how does this so I mean, back to UFOs though.
Yes.
Sarah, do you think that there's a central meaning of the UFO? Is it like if it does come from within us rather than from outside of us, what is the psychological drive or the semantic engine behind it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think in general, it is kind of like its own version of a god, something bigger and greater than us that comes from a place we don't understand, even if you think that place is like the world's greatest military, something you don't have access to, bigger than you, beyond you, and also a little bit more advanced than you, which is kind of, a godlike figure, whether that's a technological god or an alien god or whatever you have, but just something that you can't quite access, but that suggests that there is existence beyond yours, even if it's just in the Pentagon.
Would that be therefore a case for or support for a case of saying that UFOs are a religious experience, or would you say that UFOs and God/religion are part of a larger category?
I think I would say the latter, that the meaning making and the searching for something beyond yourself is the larger category, and some people go about it through traditional religion, some people go about it through meditation, some through UFOs, and so I see them branching down in that way from the umbrella.
Yeah.
I've heard you mention kind of the appeal of ufology is that it's a perpetual mystery, right? It only takes the one. Where do you see the UFO community going in the future if it is this perpetual mystery and we have no easy answers that a lot of people do crave?
I mean, I think if history repeats itself in the general public, probably outside of wonderful shows like this, interest will probably wane. I feel like we've been in a UFO wave. It has crested, probably crested already, and is about to go back down. And then something will happen that will unite more people again back to being interested, which I think is something that is happening, at least since the late 40s. And so I think it will, kind of recede. And I think it seems to me like there's a weird split between the people interested in materialist things. Like obviously the most official interest coming right now is from the U.S. Department of Defense, which in general I think is interested in them from a very materialist perspective. And then, you know, people who are seriously considering other much less materialistic explanations. And so I think I'm not sure which group dominates among the people who will stay interested in UFOs during the dip in the wave, but it seems like, yeah, I don't know.
So,
I wish I had a crystal ball, though. Yeah.
You don't see disclosure in the future, then?
No, I think disclosure, like fusion, is always about 10 years away. But,
yep. Okay.
Yeah. That would be cool, though. I'd be pro disclosure, but.
What the have you seen anything to change your mind about what you wrote in your book about the Nimitz encounters?
No, I don't think that I have, although it's possible you have seen more information than me. But I think, I mean, they're very interesting, very highly publicized encounters, and ones where the eyewitness accounts don't always match the data we have, or we don't have the data. And so they, to me, are still like a lot of other UFO sightings, where you just, if you can't reconcile those two things, you can't learn that much about them if you don't have enough, what does Mick West say, the low information zone, even though it's coming from a big thing gathering a lot of data. I think they're in the low information zone. And so both sides will continue to interpret them the way that suits their, favorite explanation, including me, like I just did. So, yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think about those these days?
Comedy of errors, in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of uncharitable, but I think it does sort of capture the possibility that there could be events where lots of contingencies come together and people, including human misperception and confabulation, and it could be like on sort of tail end of a distribution, but you know, those things do happen, and you know, they're probably more likely than extraterrestrials.
Yeah, definitely. I have extremely little faith in human perception. Yeah. I think, you know, when you say things like that, anything about, you know, doubting a service member's encounter with something or their perception of it, it doesn't go well, especially on the internet. You guys might have noticed. And but like every human brain is just a human brain and visual system, and like it's not perfect, and it's not really, it didn't evolve in circumstances where things like that were happening. And so I don't trust my own perceptions. I wouldn't trust my own perceptions in that, and I yeah, don't trust anyone else's fully either.
Right.
Leah, are you offended by that?
Am I offended by what?
By Sarah's skepticism about human perception and its...
No, dude. Like, at the heart of what I believe is that your mind basically shapes your reality. Like, I mean, like, I see this as an oblique kind of compliment to that.
Nice.
Sarah, you wrote an article for Scientific American, I believe it was published in the summer 2022, if I remember correctly. And the title is something to the effect of the NASA UFO study might be more about atmospheric science than like aliens. That's around the title? Mm-hmm. You know, there's this long history of like atmospheric stuff. Like, you know, we have all these accounts from the Middle Ages of like angel choirs and stuff. And then we find out that meteor fireball swarms are real. So, you know, can't identify any single one being that. But then it's like, oh, there's a physical thing out there that people are seeing. And then you have the Virgin Mary observations where it would seem to be sort of a discrete type of thing. But to me anyway, like maybe there isn't something material actually occurring there. It's like a good, I don't know though. That being said, so we have a long history though in the natural sciences of these novel phenomena that are rare and hard to describe and step outside of our understanding of the world that we have currently. Do you think is there any prospect of something like that occurring in the UFO subject? And if it does happen, do you think it'll actually have any effect on the conversation? Or do you think people will just sort of continue past it?
So do you mean that you know that maybe UFO study will turn up something that is the equivalent of the Virgin Mary appearing and stuff, or angels coming down from on high?
Just I'll cite just the memos internally that John Greenwald Jr. has had declassified and published from the chairperson, I don't remember his name, of the UAP study group out of NASA, and he cites something called the skirmion, which is a kind of ball lightning within those memos as one possible pursuit. So, you know, like I guess I'm asking, like, if NASA concludes, like, oh, there actually are phenomena with the features that J. Allen Hynek, you know, summarized in 1972, if like the observational features are the same and they actually these objects exist, they're just some kind of ball lightning. Is anybody going to care about that? Is that going to matter at all? People are just going to like ignore that and move forward.
Dude, Campbell, can we have one episode where you don't profess your love for ball lightning?
Well, you know, that's not possible because me and Ball Lightning are in love. We are getting married.
We're getting married.
Yeah.
It's electric.
Nice.
Sparks fly. Yeah. God.
Yeah. Are we invited to the wedding?
No, we're eloping.
No.
It's a passionate affair. Well, that's what you think, not for us.
I mean, I think that you know, that it's possible that we'll discover some new atmospheric phenomenon under which we can group some amount of UFO sightings. And I think probably the people who think that's the case already will believe and internalize NASA's explanation of that. And the people who do not will use whatever term NASA comes up with, the same way people use swamp gas now. Just as a derogatory, you know, that was a bullshit explanation that someone gave so that they could explain things away so that the public wouldn't panic. And so, yeah, I think it will probably be split. And I think there will also always, and probably rightly so, be people who say, you know, the panel was biased, they're hiding information, we can't trust their explanations. And, you know, they're human beings too. Probably some of that is true. And so I think that we will have a diversity of opinions on whatever they find. Mostly, I am not confident that they have enough money to go find anything. I think they only have $100,000 to do their whole study, paying like whatever it was, 12 or 15 people to be on the panel. And so I think they kind of jumped on the bandwagon for unknown reasons, but didn't actually dedicate enough resources to find something meaningful, which I think is kind of a shame. But I mean, maybe they produce a preliminary study and then it's compelling enough that they do more.
Would you be able to speak on, I'm very curious to hear your opinion on the way that the US government has communicated on this subject. It is mind-blowing to me. It's so confusing. We know from, you know, the internal briefings that intelligence agencies don't want people to be believing in conspiracy theories, heavily discouraged to think about this kind of things. I cite this frequently in UFO people on the same slides as like white nationalists and stuff. Like they don't want people to be engaging with this for a variety of valid national security reasons. Why do you think, you know, President Obama, former director of CIA, John Brennan, like a former director of national intelligence, like all of these people coming out being like, oh, these things are zipping around in the sky, we don't know what they are. Why are they doing this to us, Sarah? Please.
Yeah, it is kind of like a very confusing push and pull situation where, like, when I was working on things and trying to get information out of the Pentagon, they would phrase things so vaguely and blandly that I could not even understand the words that they were saying. Like, I was like, that's not a sentence. It has no meaning. I don't want to get what you're saying wrong, but it literally means nothing to me. And then at the same time, yeah, people come out and say that. And then you have, certain senators saying things a few years ago, and it seems very polarized in that way. And I think the cumulative effect of that is just to leave everyone confused, which I don't think is necessarily the point on purpose exactly, but I think is the effect. And I think, one of my biggest takeaways from having, I'm lucky for my job that I just get to write, people who do things and ask them questions about their lives. Kind of like you guys do here. And just that at all levels of government, the people are just people, and people have their own beliefs. And sometimes President Obama thinks, UFOs are interesting, or who is it? The former director of the CIA thinks the same thing. And just like, people say what they want and think what they want, and then the official response maybe tries to walk that back a little bit. But then I think also that the current efforts and the efforts of the past few years within the government have been driven by, it seems like to me, outside forces convincing people that this is a problem, and that a lot of those forces are, have deep beliefs in the non-drone nature of a lot of UFOs. And so that's kind of a push and pull too. Like, if we're having this very serious materialistic defense discussion where we use extremely vague language, but it's driven fundamentally by people who've had experiences and believe in them. Like, I think it's just, do we curse on, I already cursed on this podcast. Do we do that? It's a,
yeah, you can swear.
Yeah.
It's apparently not good for the YouTube algorithm, but
okay.
whatever.
Well, no, that's fine. I don't want to mess that up. It's a mess. It's a mess. Yeah. And I think, it kind of goes along with the reason that a lot of conspiracies aren't true, which is just that, like, government in the end is not actually that competent or coordinated. And I think the same is true of their communication responses. But
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to make a quick comment about how one of the things that has surprised me about the dynamics within the ufology community is the willingness to trust the government, while also in tension with the fact that, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to come up with dozens of examples of why the government as an institution is not a trustworthy institution. And that's not, I'm not saying that as, to be clear, that is not Leah an anti-vaxxer sentiment. I'm pro-vaccines. That's like Leah, like the Tuskegee experiment and crack cocaine in LA in the 80s and the Black Panthers. Like, that's the side that I'm coming from. This idea.
Isn't it outrageous that you have to make that distinction?
Oh yeah, it's completely nuts. Like, yeah, it is. And that's like, it's like I said, like, I always have to tread carefully, because I always have to be clear to people I'm not a conspiracy theorist, in the sense that, like I don't believe in conspiracies, because you don't have to believe in them to see that the government has a long history of acting in pretty violent and terrible ways and negligent ways, especially towards marginalized and oppressed peoples in this country. And so I'm always a little bit surprised by the willingness to trust the government on this subject, and then also simultaneously to accept absolutely nothing that the government actually puts out, right? No matter what those reports say, it's wrong. Like, it could say that, yes, we have the extra biological entity housed at the Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, at Wright Pat, and people would say it's wrong, and it could just all be swamp gas and weather balloons, and that would also be wrong, and they would be equally wrong, because everyone would be bad, no matter what gets said from the government. So I'm always surprised by that. I don't think that all government actors are bad or poor or wrong or anything, but I just think the tendency to trust this institution on this subject, especially in the post-Patriot Act, post-9/11 era, seems to me like just kind of, it speaks to putting UFOs ahead of like actual meaningful critical thought in many respects, and that can be very frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
It is strange from the trust no one crowd.
Yeah, right.
Mhm.
Yes, but I mean, I have seen and you know, have read also many stories of this, the same thing happening with ufology in the scientific community. Like when the scientific community isn't paying attention to them or doesn't think methods are valid or experiences are valid or whatever, then, you know, science is bad and doesn't understand us and doesn't have it right. But when somebody has a PhD and you want to put them on the panel, they're like, oh, it's a real scientist. Look at this. Or like, hey, a real scientist cares about what we're doing. And I feel like both that and the government thing is just another form of confirmation bias, which we're all prone to, but is not a great look.
Do you think that UFOs are bipartisan, or would you say that one side uses them more than the other as a kind of conduit for like smuggling in their ideas?
That's such a good question.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh. Mm-hmm. That is a good political question. I think right now I would wager, and I would be interested in what you guys think also, that at least within the defense community and their investigations, that it trends right. It trends Republican and defense oriented and nationally oriented, I think. Just because I think that you know, there has already been money and resources allocated to the study based on, you know, a defense fear. And I think in general, not speaking very broadly, that is a more right trait than a left trait to see a threat and want to spend defense money on it. And so, yeah. But I'm curious about the other takes in the room.
Well, it's interesting that the people who seem to talk about it outwardly the most are Republican Congress people, right? But then the biggest players in many respects are like top level Democrats, right? So Senator Harry Reid and then Senator Kirsten Gillibrand was one of the main speakers, with Marco Rubio as well, of course, who's a Republican. But it's strange that at the top levels, it almost appears in some ways to be bipartisan from the purely like materialist national security perspective, where it seems to me like they're sort of like, you know, it's drones that they're concerned about, obviously, and then other kinds of like, you know, aircraft of domestic threat or, you know, international threats. You know, but then we have these the Republicans that I think in a congressional level are really leaning into the identity politics that the FBI stuff talks about. And Louise, I love how you mention also a lot the with association in UFO history with white supremacy, very closely linked, almost, I would say, almost inextricably.
Yeah.
Louise, can you jump onto that?
Oh yeah, right away, sir.
No.
Yeah, I think that there has always been a kind of right-wing aspect to it, maybe a racial aspect, maybe unconsciously held, but still. But there's also been like some neo-Nazi white supremacists have kind of used ancient aliens, maybe especially, to kind of push the idea that the white race is kind of cosmically endowed with some special genius. So in that sense, there's a kind of yeah, they're trying to sort of smuggle in racial ideas, racial identity through the UFO. But somebody also mentioned, I think it was Jason Colavito mentioned that it seems to be the case that in ufology, like the thought leaders or like the people in charge of MUFON and those sorts of gigs, they tend to be conservative white men, but then the rank and file tend to be more liberal or even left-leaning. And that's a kind of interesting dichotomy. So yeah, I think that there's probably something to that, but I'm not sure like what the causal explanation for that would be.
We also have a comment from Steve Young here that it becomes even more interesting when considering that the UFO Twitter crowd is largely left-leaning. Yes, with notable exception.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned this before on the show, where I think UFOs and ufology are a powerful Trojan horse to unwind consensus reality and to undermine public confidence in the government and in institutions. And I see those two objectives in many respects as being at the heart of the alt-right and totalitarian movement in this country. And I think that UFOs are a compelling subject for the average person, and to use them to smuggle in these ideas and introduce them more broadly through kind of an innocuous approach feels deliberately political. Like, I don't think the intern is here. Hi to the intern, Nick. Like, it feels to me a deliberate maneuver for Tucker Carlson, for instance, to be hosting shows on this, because there are lots of people in this community who across the board would identify as being left or progressive, but will happily tune in and support Tucker Carlson just because he's talking about UFOs. And I think that, you know, not that I think exactly that Rachel Maddow should be having Gary Nolan on her show, but I do think that this subject is quickly becoming yet another subject in the eternal cultural war that the right and right sympathizing movements have co-opted. And I mean, we see this in like the woo-woo, new age, yoga, whatever movement too. You know, like the Whole Foods to Q pipeline is like way shorter than most people think. And it's also predicated on these same ideas of unwinding consensus reality, really kind of trying, post-truth, trying to exploit, like trying to exploit subjectivity of experience by also like leading people to not agree or believe in the same things or same frameworks.
I think if they can turn high school sports into a political wedge issue, then they could do it with UFOs. I think this could really be the beginning of that, in my opinion.
Yeah, and also with alternative archaeology, you know, tons of people on the right they absolutely love Graham Hancock's ideas. There's some overlap there with like Ancient Aliens, but again, it's sort of this attack on the establishment, quote unquote, or kind of they put forth like a persecution complex type of thing where like they cast themselves as the victims who are being targeted by, you know, people who actually have science degrees or actual credentials or expertise. So yeah, we see that across the board.
I mean, and like the other thing too, like, I was going to say, and Sarah, I will say it, you don't have to agree with what I'm going to say, I just want to be super clear, but like, I think there's a whole lot of misogyny in ufology too. It feels like a community and a subject that is rife with misogyny. And it's, you know, I'd like to remind people that misogyny doesn't show up as just calling women bitches or whatever. It shows up as someone writing an op-ed about you on Facebook, but not talking to you. Or people not responding to DMs, so the male co-hosts will get the communication. Or it shows up to not being invited to research groups that other people get invited to. And I think that the kind of demographic makeup of this community and like the gatekeeping around it can be extremely damning in terms of welcoming a variety of identities and experiences and backgrounds and viewpoints. I do think it's getting better, like credit where credit's due. Like I think Linda Thompson, opinions aside, like she is someone that I think has done a lot to sort of elevate the visibility of women in this subject. I think Erica Lukes has done an incredible amount to get to elevate the visibility of women. Or even just basically non-cis men. But I feel also like it's still such a good old boys club in many respects, and that doesn't lend itself to like authentic truth seeking or sense making as well when you're kind of cutting out huge swaths of the population.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when, you know, a complicated topic kind of by necessity requires diversity of thought to make any sense of it. And if you're not only pushing out the thoughts that you don't like outside of your echo chamber, but the people who might bring them. And yeah, I mean, I do agree with you, Leah. And I think even just and I do think it's getting better. I think it was, I mean, so. it was pretty bad when I was first working on the book, but I mean, that was, you know, five years ago now, but I mean, you just had to be willing to take a lot of hits and a lot of people yelling at you if they, for like days at a time, if they didn't agree with you. And I think, you know, that probably happened to a lot of men also, but when members of one group are all yelling at one member of another group, then that I think that feels different. And so, yeah, I just had to leave my phone at home a lot of times and ignore what people were doing. And so, but yeah, I think I think people have kind of over the past few years changed their own minds about some things and become more open to other ideas, and then some maybe become more open to other people, hopefully.
Yeah. I'll just say I entirely support what you said, Leah and Sarah. I agree entirely. I've seen very troubling things in this community that could list, but I guess I won't. And it's disappointing. But, you know, Leah, you were, I think, the first person I've noted in this entire community to make a moral stand and actually like make a point about saying like, this isn't acceptable. We need to like step aside and call this out and make a distinction openly and actively and state your support for rights and opposition to bigotry and things like that. So, you know, I'm very thankful that you have led this charge, Leah, and I don't want to, you know, I want to emphasize that here and now.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I just think, like, when we get back to the premise of this entire show, it's really genuinely for real predicated on having good faith conversations. I would love to have like J. Christopher King on the show. I would love to talk to him. I would love to talk to James Iandoli. I would love to talk to Gary Nolan. Like, I am open and want to talk to people that I would consider to be on the other side of the aisle. Even if, candidly, I may sit more on their aisle than on Big West's side. And I think that this is a community, particularly on UFO Twitter, but I think just ufology in general, is so prone to these hyper polarized dynamics because so much of people's identities are tied up in the subject that to have any kind of criticism or pushback feels very much like a deliberate personal attack. You know, and I mean, I think it's, gosh, I kind of hesitate to say what I'm going to say, whatever. Everyone's already mad at me anyway this week. I think the other thing with ufology, I think there are great and brilliant and incisive and incredible minds in this community, people that I just monumentally respect intellectually and personally. But I also think that this is a community that provides safe harbor for extraordinary dysregulation and mental illness as well. And it can be extremely difficult to discern between the two sometimes. And that can also be sort of a frustrating trap or dynamic that can show up in this space. And it's unfortunate, right? It's to the detriment of like everyone. I'm not like pointing fingers. I'm just saying it's in general, in terms of how it contributes to the community dynamic, it's a net negative.
Do you find that to be the same, like when you go to conferences in person as it is in online interactions, or is it worse?
Dude, people are so well behaved at conferences. So I've only been to two. I've been to the Anomalous Experiences and the Phenomena in New York City, the one hosted by Jay and James. And they were both, the first time I went for free and the second time I actually paid. So if that gives you an idea of like, I really enjoyed myself. It felt like a very small academic conference. Like everyone was very well behaved. People that I'd seen at each other's throats on Twitter were like totally broing it up. Like people like, with perhaps one notable exception. But it's funny because I was saying to one of my friends after that I was like, man, I was the least normie looking person in the room because I'm like tattooed from my neck down, and like everybody else looked like rank and file, very standard Midwestern people. They're all very normie. You would never know they were UFO people. It was incredible.
Yeah, Sarah, could you comment on, for your book, they're already here in 2020, you went around extensively interacting with people. Could you talk a little bit about, like, when you met somebody and then they started getting comfortable with you and like disclosing their opinions on things that are like so far removed from the standard, could you just talk a little bit about like the way that you sort of saw them change and become more accepting to communicate with you as you engaged with them more and more?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it was important to me going into every interview to kind of tell them where I'm coming from. Like, I think, you know, journalists can take for granted, like, I'm here to interview you, you're on the record, and just be, you know, ruthless about it sometimes, and not, you know, not care what happens to the other person because they're on deadline. And hopefully no journalists are listening to this, but that does happen. And it was important to me to tell people where I was coming from, like how I would be using their interview. Like, you know, I come from a more skeptical perspective. I, you know, work in science journalism, but I'm obviously here because I care about what you think, what you experienced, what you believe, and I will do my best to portray that accurately, even if we don't agree. And so kind of led with that so that they, you know, wouldn't expect to necessarily be in a book that was just rah extraterrestrial hypothesis UFOs, but would feel comfortable. And I think, you know, I tried to talk to people in their own environment. Like I went to this place called the UFO Watchtower out here in Colorado, actually just right over there, not very far.
I've camped there. I camped at the base. Yeah, so I camped at the base of Blanca Peak in like January, like 5 years ago, and I drove to the UFO Tower and I drove to the Great Sand Dunes on that weekend trip. Yeah,
it's a beautiful area.
Cool, actually, yeah, it's gorgeous.
Yeah. I used to live in Denver, and I just moved right on the other side of the mountains from Blanca.
Oh, that's awesome.
So
yeah,
right out there. It's dark now, but yeah,
that's super cool.
Yeah. So like when I interviewed the woman who started that, and then the woman who was also running it, like I did it there, you know, on their turf. And I feel like actually people were pretty open from the beginning of an interview. I think, you know, we were talking earlier about experiencers creating a safe space for each other of just like, you know, I say something, you say something, we're on the same page. Like my experience is going to be respected. And I think talking to those people, and also even, you know, talking to just people in my life, as soon as you say like, I'm writing a book about UFOs, everyone's like, have I got a story for you? Everyone, well, not everyone, but like many people you wouldn't expect, including, you know, like Leah said, the most Midwestern looking people in your life with the most banker jobs have seen something crazy in the sky. And so I think people were honestly just happy to have someone want to hear about it. And that's probably a bad answer because I didn't have to work very hard. But I also think here's another place where my Mormon upbringing does me well. I think I just seem approachable just because of that.
I'd love to actually ask I'd love to ask a follow-up about that because I'm so intrigued how like there's such a significant presence of like Mormons and ex-Mormons in sort of UFO culture, I've noticed. And I've wondered, and yeah, maybe you could just shine some light on it. Yeah, obviously, yes or no. But like, do you think, because we talked a little bit of worldviews and how like worldviews can already contain the schema for you to categorize a new observation. Like in Mormonism, I know that there's like the concept of other planets already existing within that like cosmology, and it always makes me wonder, like, do you feel that has any influence on somebody who is subscribed to that worldview being more open to observations, you know, of that, the sort of like conceptual nature, like UFOs or whatever?
Yeah, I think that it does. I mean, like, yeah, like you said, Mormon theology has the cosmology of there are other planets. If you're a good Mormon, you'll get your own planet. And
Must be nice.
I think, yeah, I know. I don't get mine anymore, but some other people do. And you know, there's like a scripture I remember growing up hearing, like worlds without number have I created, and so that is just already part of your worldview. Whereas I think that like the idea of obviously not that all UFO ideas are extraterrestrial ideas, but when you grow up thinking that could be out there, it leads you to not find at least the extraterrestrial idea behind UFOs to be conflicting with your fundamental religion or spirituality. I've actually seen more about this in the SETI community, where it was also a Mormon senator from Utah named Jake Garn, who was really the supporter in Congress of SETI programs. And I think, you know, probably for some of the same reasons. Whereas if you're like a Catholic senator or something else, and it's either directly contradicts your theology or is not explicitly mentioned, you kind of have to do a mental shift to incorporate it at all. But if it's already there, you're just like, oh yeah, that's my long lost cousin's planet and his alien UFOs or something. I don't think consciously, but I think if it's permissible by your worldview, then that makes more sense.
Yeah. So I wanted to flag a question from one of our audience members, Steve, total friend of the pod, as they say. We're just going to rewind a little bit to talk more about, I guess, like nuts and bolts here. Does Sarah feel any of the entities which have formed to detect UAP, for example, the Galileo Project, are very promising? And how would they be different from numerous surveillance entities already operating? So it kind of touches on what we were saying or talking about with the NASA panel earlier.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, the idea of the Galileo Project definitely seems promising to me, you know, setting up various devices explicitly meant to try to capture anomalous things, and maybe gathering some statistical data on how often that happens and understanding what it is. Like, in theory, great. I would like that information. Also, however, I don't think that they have deployed anything. Someone can correct me if that's wrong. I don't know that I'm up on the latest, but and I think a lot of the people, not all of the people, but a lot of the people who are part of the Galileo Project kind of had the idea that like they were the first ones to have the idea, and they're like, nobody's ever thought of doing this data collection before. What if we just did it? And I feel like ufology does that a lot, just kind of starts its own history over every decade or so. And so I think if they succeed in getting things up, that's great. We'll get some hard data that will be useful, even if there's nothing in it, because you can establish some like lower bounds of how often things don't occur. But I actually think that the NASA panel maybe has the better idea, which relates to the second part of Steve's question, the surveillance technology that already exists. Like, I don't know how many times I've thought like the world is the most surveilled that it has ever been. There's satellites, thousands of them. Many, I guess I don't have the latest number, at least hundreds of them are pointed at Earth, looking at Earth, taking data on Earth. We have huge, you know, tracts of radar systems all over. We have, you know, Earth observing. There's just so much data on the world that you could mine for information about UFOs without creating your own special data collection system. And I think that might be a better way to go, which is what, if people aren't familiar with the NASA panel, they're going to be looking through the data that they've collected for decades and try to identify, you know, what might be useful for this. And I kind of feel like, yeah, use what you've got. You've got terabytes and terabytes and terabytes and terabytes that maybe you could hang out with that for a little while before you build something new. And not to keep bringing up SETI, but that's actually the direction that SETI has gone. You know, the SETI Institute tried tried to and did build their own telescope array to look for radio signals from potential extraterrestrial civilizations. But there's only so much money in the world. They can only do so much work. And so in addition, now they're trying to just say, hey, there's tons and tons of data coming from regular telescopes. Maybe we could just get a copy of that and look for weird stuff in it because it's already there. We don't want it to go to waste. So,
yeah. Well, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier in the episode, too, this idea that we need to be looking for physical nuts and bolts things in the sky, right? Which, I don't know, still feels like a very antiquated thing to me in many respects, or passé in some ways.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look back on like Arthur C. Clarke writing in like 1953 said he did not expect UFOs to be material objects, and if they are of alien origin, then they will be far more technologically advanced than anything we can conceive of. So people have been thinking about this for a while.
Dude, did you see? So on the Discord, just an aside. So on the Discord, I posted this interview with Long John Nebel, who was like the proto Art Bell. He was like this overnight radio host out of New York City, that hosted like Adamski, like all these shows about CIA mind control and stuff. And he had this incredible panel discussion with like Hastings, Arthur C. Clarke, and like Kehoe. Was Kehoe writing in the 60s?
He would have been, yeah.
Would he have been, if he would have been in the 60s? I think he's also in this panel. It's really interesting to listen to, partly because it's like, holy shit, these are like a who's who of like UFO, science fiction, whatever people, but also because the tenor of the conversation, like it could have happened yesterday in terms of what they say to each other about like, well, humans have always been experiencing weird stuff. Look at the Bible, look at hieroglyphics. Well, certainly the government knows something about this, but they're not telling us because of Soviet Russia. Like it's like the exact same lines, only now we'd say China instead of Russia. But it's totally worth listening to just for that kind of, you get a sense for kind of the perennial nature of this subject.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Donald Menzel, a physicist who later was revealed to be working for, I believe, the CIA, he wrote a book. It was like in 1954, published in the. It's cited in the Bibliography of UFO Material, published in 1969, and the summary is that Donald Menzel declares that he has solved the UFO enigma finally, or whatever. It's like 1953. So, you know, yeah, absolutely, we're sort of spinning wheels here, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that happens though, even in like very strictly scientific fields. I was just reading a thread on Twitter the other day about, I don't know if people are familiar with the idea of particle physics in crisis, like our standard model of how, you know, what particles exist, how they interact, how the universe works is wrong, and we built all these machines and they can't find the answers and blah blah blah. And someone was a physicist was writing a thread on, you know, the crisis in particle physics. And then he was quoting, he was like, I found this amazing report on the crisis in particle physics. You won't believe what it said. So insightful. And then like 11 tweets down, he was like, this was from 1977. You guys were doing the same thing over again. Just, you know, the nature of us, I guess. Yeah.
Yes.
Incredible.
So we have about 15 minutes left of the show. I'd love to switch gears and talk about your upcoming book.
Sure.
I'm super fascinated by atomic culture and nuclear history, and I was delighted to hear that that's the subject of your forthcoming book. What got you started on that subject? What captured your interest?
Yeah, so I moved out to Colorado about 6 years ago, I guess. And I just started, you know, my job is to find interesting science things and write about them. So I was looking for scientific facilities around me and just writing them, being like, hi, my name is Sarah. Can I come visit and see what you do? And people say yes sometimes. And so, you know, one of those places was Los Alamos National Lab down in New Mexico, a few hours away from where I am now. And, you know, I had like a vague idea of what the Department of Energy, which runs the lab, does. And I knew that they were not just in charge of energy, but that they were in charge of nuclear weapons. But so I went to the lab. They gave me some very nice tours of like, here's what we do for Mars exploration, and here's what we do in dark matter, and here's some stuff about, you know, supernovae. And then like eventually I was probably a little slow on the uptake, but I realized that like all the things they were studying pretty much in some way related back to understanding the way that nuclear weapons work. And so there was this like tiny top of the iceberg that they were telling me about, but the real purpose of most of it was the rest of the iceberg underneath. And so I just kind of became fascinated with the scientists who did work on both of those things, like, you know, an astronomer who studied supernova and then got reeled into the Department of Energy to study, you know, the nuclear reactions inside of nuclear weapons, and now kind of has like a foot in both worlds. And what do they think of that? And what is it like to work on, you know, world destroying weapons? And yeah, I mean, just like in ufology, I was surprised, dumbly, I shouldn't have been surprised, just to find like a huge diversity of opinions and experiences and ways that people did think about it, political leanings and everything. And so it's just, once again, it was too long for an article. Nobody wants that. So I had to go write a book instead. So
could you speak on that a little bit? Just like, how do people who are good people, we spoke a little bit before about how everybody's like an individual in an institution. How are these people going to work and kind of working within the one industry in the history of the world that could like end human civilization? How do they go home and do like feel okay about that?
Well, if you want to get an interview with them, you shouldn't phrase it like that.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, no expectation there. So.
Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. No, I mean, I think what I have found, you know, with the caveat that the people they let me talk to at the lab, like access is highly controlled. In the end, I talk to who I'm allowed to talk to. And so most of the people I talk to would agree with you about that characterization. They arguably dislike nuclear weapons and the nuclear weapons complex more than the average person because they know more, but they're kind of, some of them are of the opinion that like deterrence, this idea that if we have weapons and the other people have weapons, no one will use the weapons because we're constantly threatening each other. Like some of them believe that. The majority of them believe it only to some degree.
The Mexican standoff, always a good call.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a dangerous one. But more of them believe like they come at it from a more just like realist perspective of like nuclear weapons exist. They're going to continue to exist. What we have right now is a set of weapons that is getting older and needs upkeep. And then if we're going to keep them, someone needs to make sure that, you know, they work right and they're not decaying. And I would rather that be me, a person who hates nuclear weapons, than someone who's like, man, I love a bomb. And so I think that's most of that. And so, yeah, I think a phrase I heard a lot was, yeah, deterrence will have to do until we can have disarmament, and they would all prefer disarmament, but until then they would rather have like good people working on it, which I mean, some of that is, you know, they work there, they have to rationalize it, but I think a lot of it was genuine also.
Have you been to Cheyenne Mountain?
I have, actually. Yeah.
Oh yeah, tell us.
Yeah, that was another thing where when I moved to Colorado, I was like, hey, Cheyenne Mountain, what's up? I'm totally a journalist. Do you want to let me inside? And they did. And actually later I asked them why, because at the time they were only letting a few journalists in per year. And they said that they thought I would write an article that scared their enemies. And I was like, you don't know me at all. Yeah, it was deeply strange. You just get off the highway, you drive up a road that keeps telling you to stop driving up the road or bad things will happen to you. And you end up at this opening in a mountain, in the side of a mountain. You drive a car inside, and there's just like these giant blast doors meant to, you know, keep things from outside from going in and keep things inside safe. And then, I mean, technically it's like it's a lot of buildings. It's kind of like a mini office park of giant buildings on springs underneath this granite mountain. But you can't see them all at once. It's just like a tiny opening. It looks like the entrance to like a country club. You walk in And then it also looks like an office building inside, except there's people who are kind of keeping watch for whether anyone is sending nuclear weapons. The coolest part, here's the coolest part, I think, that they just had like a natural, well, they had dug a depression out of the rock in one part of the cave, and they were like, here's where we put our diesel. And it was just like a huge thing of diesel inside the mountain hanging out for running their generators. So
Just like a pool of diesel?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I know.
Sure smelled good in there. Jeez.
Yeah, it was beautiful. Yeah, it was, I can't imagine us undertaking a construction project like that now, but in the Cold War, they had a lot of fear and a lot of time on their hands. So
did you get a sense from all these people you spoke to, are they hopeful that we, like as the experts, that we can get out of this, or are we screwed really?
Get out of this, like get rid of
like
rid the world of nuclear weapons.
I mean,
like, is
dude,
there
the glaciers are gonna melt and we're all gonna drown, okay? So
it's only this
nuclear concerns are secondary.
It's kind of like the thing where it's like, you know, with people all over the world, they got their fingers on the button. Like statistically, it should have already happened. So it's like we're sort of in like borrowed time right now. I guess is sort of my view. Like, how are the experts sort of reading that?
Yeah, the experts, especially, you know, the invasion of Ukraine happened when I was in the middle of working on the book, and I visited Los Alamos just like a few days after it started, and I expected to go there and be comforted when I asked questions that they were like a little bit less afraid of me of World War III, and they were like, no, actually, we're working on some stuff to see about what happens if that happens. So I'm like, I don't really like that answer.
That's like a mine shaft gap from Dr. Strangelove. It's like, we'll just give up and start digging the mine shafts at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I think that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask a question, so please finish your thought.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think they are realistically afraid of things. Like they don't think that nothing will ever happen, and I think they and outside policy experts kind of tend to agree that the longer you have them sitting around, whether through accident or misunderstanding or deliberate attack, like something is going to happen sometime probably. And so yeah, I mean it's scary, but hopefully the glaciers wash over us before that. It'll be a more peaceful death.
I love this. I love discussing the eschatology of the modern world on my weird little YouTube show.
Yeah, how do you want to die? Yeah.
Yes. Sarah, so I was going to ask just off the cuff if you have any cool stories or things you found out while you were researching this book.
That is a good question. Let me think about that for a second. I mean, the answer is definitely yes. So there's a file right below my finger of all the coolest stuff. My favorite, you know, somebody who I kind of follow throughout the book, at least the draft I turned in, we'll see what they actually publish, but is a woman who works on detecting nuclear detonations from space, like the satellites that watch to see if anyone is testing weapons or exploding one in anger. And she went to school in Colorado right across from the place where they used to produce a bunch of the plutonium that goes in the middle of weapons. And she went to this super liberal kind of hippie school where her friends all used to go to this place, which was called Rocky Flats, and protest the making of these plutonium pits. Cool. And then now, yeah, it was very cool. Now she's working, you know, in non-proliferation in like a pretty peaceful part of the nuclear complex, but at the place where they're about to be making plutonium pits again. And she's like, the nuclear complex is just following me throughout my whole life because they're about to start making that plutonium there. So, but yeah, so I guess full circle, coincidences in the nuclear complex.
Sarah, would you say that your direct engagement it changed your view at all on like nuclear power or anything? Like engaging with it, has it made you feel more positive about it or anything?
I think that is a hard question. I mean, from a purely like physics, economics, and climate change perspective, like nuclear power is awesome, but I think spending more time around anything probably makes you a little more cautious about it. Like, I think humans will always run reactors. Companies probably will always run reactors. Humans are going to make mistakes and companies are going to cut corners. So I think I feel a little bit more maybe the risks than I just of humans running an enterprise, not of nuclear power on its own. And so not that I want the government to run everything in our lives, but I think I would like to see some extremely heavy oversight of things going on. Yeah. But actually, side note, people who work on nuclear things are, I think, much less afraid of radiation than the average person who kind of hears radiation and runs screaming. But people who work with it every day, understand a little more about how much is required for something bad to happen, and that actually we're all getting hit by a bunch of radiation right now, and we're technically fine, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah, I studied nuclear engineering for a few years in college and did lots of work at the linear accelerator facility at my school. And that, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm totally flip about it, but I mean, sleeping next to someone in bed is more radiation than somebody gets working at a nuclear power plant. And like the White House is too radioactive to host a nuclear power plant, to give you an idea of like just how tightly regulated a lot of this stuff is. So we are just coming up at the top of the hour. Sarah, where can we find you, and when is your book coming out?
You can find me. I'm on Twitter at Scoles Sarah, Scoles Sarah, and I have a website that is the reverse of that is sarahscoles.com, and my book is coming out. Good question. I would also like to know the answer, but I think probably the very beginning of next year, like January, February of next year. So don't forget about it. Keep an eye out.
We won't. In fact, after it comes out, I'm sure I'll be sliding into your DMs again to be like, "Hey, Sarah, come on the show. Let's talk about news."
Yeah, I'll be responding because guess what is also an old boys club is the nuclear complex. So
and how? Yes,
yeah,
yes, yes. Many thanks for Michael Redmond for joining the show tonight, also known as Fringe Quest. You're definitely one of our audience's favorites. Thank you so much for jumping on tonight. We really appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Of course. Yeah. All right. Have a good night, Sarah. Take care.
Bye.
All right, gentlemen. Sarah Scoles. Pretty great.
Yeah, really great.
Really great. Yeah. Tons of fun to talk to. Just an incredible breadth of interest and knowledge. Just a treasure. All right, let's do the standard end of show round robin. Lewis, Nick, Campbell, what's going on? What are you guys working on?
I'm writing an article about.
Yeah.
Sorry, Lewis. I'm sorry. What was that?
I'm writing an article about the sort of ATIP and all that stuff. Just kind of trying to find some general trends within the historical trajectory of that whole narrative and saga.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, it'll be out soon.
I'm not doing anything. I'm going to bed after this.
Does your Mac work?
No, I wish. I plugged it in once and I saw sparks and some smoke came out of it. So I think that thing's fried. So it's just a decoration now. But beneath that is a palmistry board game. If we ever want to like bust that out on the chat and play it together.
That's yes. We should do an open lines palmistry night.
Oh, I want to do a Zener card night too. I got a couple.
Oh, dude, definitely. Yeah, so we have guests the next couple of weeks, but then there's like a stretch where we don't have anyone, and we should totally do like a Zener card night.
I would love it.
Stuff that would be awesome.
And I'll
I
have
think
to
I have a
learn.
copy of Kreskin's ESP too, if we want to do some pendulum work.
Oh hell yeah! I'm gonna try to like remotely control. I'll be sitting here with like my selenite and rose quartz, trying to mentally control the pendulum. It'll be awesome. Dean Braden will call me the next day and invite me to join IONS.
I bet.
Fucking best day of my life. Anyway, Campbell, what about you, man? What's going on?
A lot of shoveling, snow, a lot of snow.
Mm-hmm.
Keeping busy. But no, I'm not, well, you know, I'm doing stuff, but nothing too major on the UFO subject right now. I feel like my website's where I want it to be, and I'm just kind of like enjoying what we're doing here on the show, and just coasting kind of, I guess. Don't have much interesting to say. I am enjoying our weekly chats, though, and I like to stay up to date on what's going on. So what about you, Leah? What have you been up to?
What have I been up to?
Anything good?
I mean, anything good. I have been up to lots of things, very few of them good, but nothing terrible, so I guess that's okay. Still working on Art Bell, gonna be working on Art Bell. I don't know, my goal is to have a draft put together by the end of the year. And I plan on doing it all electronically and not charging for the book. I'm just gonna give it out free.
Nice.
Besides that, behind the scenes, I mentioned it last week, jumping in as like a co-pilot on Calling Out Beings periodically. Gonna be probably kicking off like my own private interview series sometime in the near-ish future. I actually just reached out to Josh Cutchin, who wrote The Ecology of Souls. I have a handful of other people, so it's not gonna be UFO related. It'll be more like just like weird shit I'm into. Actually, I'm trying to get a rare book librarian I know who specializes in like queer erotic literature from like the 40s and 50s. So like pretty much like any of the wild and weird people in my life I want to start talking to more.
That seems cool, actually.
Yeah, I'm super excited. Her name's Rebecca Bauman. She's at IU. So obviously Sarah tonight. Next week we have Tom, Estimate of the Situation, which I have another copy of his comic here. It's the same comic, graphic novel with a new cover. We're having Tom on next week. Then we have Jay Shanks, who runs Paracon. He does like cryptids, high strangeness, Fortiana. He'll be on the week after. Then we're going to be joined by Jeff from Strange Recon to talk about military black ops tech and the UFO community.
Nice.
And then finally, on March 1st, we'll be hosting Marco Visconti. So he'll be dialing in from Italy. So we're going to have to adjust the timing. It'll be a mid-afternoon show. But he's into occultism, anti-fascism, magic, Western esoteric traditions, and actually is just publishing a book on Crowley and magic. He's a real deal, and obviously not UFO, but he'll be a blast to have on.
Other cool stuff. That sounds awesome. Lots of good stuff to look forward to.
Super excited. Yeah, and of course, gentlemen, anyone in the audience, if anyone ever has recommendations for guests, we're definitely opening up the aperture, trying to talk to more people, not necessarily restricted to UFOs or ufology. As long as it's someone interested in a good faith conversation, we'd love to talk to them. So feel free to DM me, shoot me an email, message us on Discord, and I'll try to get someone on the show.
Yeah, people jump on the Discord. Come and argue with me.
No,
tell me I'm wrong.
We don't need to argue to do that. But yep, Discord is linked in the show description. And we also have links to all of our Twitters. And I'll actually go back and add Sarah's Twitter as well. So we're at 11:03. It is time for my beauty rest.
Same.
You gentlemen need to go get your sweet dreams. But thanks again for another episode of the Invisible Night School.
Good night, everyone.
Have a nice night. Bye.